So why don't we go ahead and get started? And I will introduce myself. I'm Darius Tandon. I'm a faculty member at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. Really delighted to moderate this panel and to have so many folks joining for the meeting in general and also for this breakout. Just to give you a sense of what we're going to do, the structure of the breakout, I'm going to very briefly introduce the panel members. And then each of the presentation teams, there are two presentations, each will present for 20 minutes. At the end of each presentation, we will take maybe one or two burning, urgent questions. And I will really keep it to one or two burning or urgent questions, but then there will be 20 minutes at the end at least for question and answer at the end of the session. So there will be ample time to get questions answered if your question was not one of the one or two burning questions that were responded to. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start to introduce the panel. And our first presenters are Helen Milojevic and David Bard, who are faculty members in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. And they co-lead the external evaluation of the McBee program in Oklahoma, as well as a learning collaborative engaged in continuous quality improvement efforts. So they will be our first presenters. And then I will also introduce our second presenter, Christine Callahan, who shares her time between the University of Maryland School of Social Work and its Financial Social Work Initiative, where she's research faculty, as well as the University of Albany's Center for Human Services Research, where she's implementing and evaluating financial literacy, financial capability programming with Healthy Families New York, which is part of Healthy Families America. So with that, I am going to turn the car keys over to Helen and David for their presentation, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you so much. And let me just pull this up. Make sure everyone can see it. Let's see, is it going to open? There we go. Can everyone see that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Always helpful to make sure that's the case before you get started. Done that a couple times myself. So I am Helen Milojevic, and I am joined today with my collaborators, Dr. David Bard and Dr. Amy Treat. We're from the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. And today I'm going to be talking about CQI to precision research, how to promote father figures' involvement in home visiting and parenting. Father figure involvement plays a crucial role in children's developmental outcomes and well-being. We also know, however, that prevention and intervention programs are typically targeted to mothers. Fathers are often excluded from these efforts. And this is despite some preliminary evidence that fathers are crucial in home visiting and other prevention programs as well. So there's budding evidence that fathers improve family retention in prevention and intervention programs, and that they also benefit directly from participating in home visiting. When they participate in home visiting, they tend to report greater child development knowledge, more positive parenting practices, improved anger management, and greater connection to community resources. Despite these benefits, both to the family and the father figures themselves, father figure participation in home visiting remains infrequent and inconsistent, and more research is needed to understand effective strategies that can help engage fathers both in home visiting directly and in parenting directly with their children. So today I'm going to describe efforts that we did here in the state of Oklahoma. We have a CQI Learning Collaborative, and we spent 18 months focused on father figures' involvement. Before I get too far, I want to just talk about how we define father figures. We define this broadly, and we define father figure as the male identified as most involved in caregiving and committed to the well-being of the child, regardless of living situation, marital status, or biological relation. A father figure may be a biological foster or adoptive father, a stepfather, or a grandfather, etc. He may or may not have legal custody and may or may not be living in the home. And this was really important as we had many families where they did not have a biological father figure, but they had somebody else who was serving in that role. And we wanted to make sure to include as many caregivers as possible. And so we define this really broadly. I will say that we tried to use the term father figure so that it made it clear that we had this broader definition. For the purposes of the talk, I'll be referring to fathers just because it's less of a mouthful, but I want to just point out that we mean this broad vision of father figure. Our CQI process was adapted from the HV Coin framework. What we did is for each learning collaborative that we had, so for this one that was focused on father engagement, as I mentioned, this was an 18-month-long endeavor. We started the 18 months first with a learning session. And at that learning session, we introduced the topic of father involvement, why it was important, why we were focusing on that effort. And during that first learning session, each of our local implementing agencies, LIAs, picked a short-term intervention and crafted a plan, do, study, act project that they were going to engage in for about 5 to 6 months. And this was an iterative process. So over the next 18 months, we did this process 3 times. So we'd have a learning session, we'd check in about how things were going. We'd have a 6-month action period where they would engage in some type of change theory, some type of intervention that they were trying to do to encourage fathers to either participate directly in home visiting or to engage in parenting with their child. And then we'd have another learning session, another plan, do, study, action period, and so on. At the end of the 18-month period, we got together and looked at our overall conclusions. What worked? What didn't? What are some of the best practices and lessons learned? And then we tried to disseminate those findings and learnings across our learning collaborative, but also more broadly with the home visiting community. Throughout all this, we provided support from our team at the Health Sciences Center, where we had monthly collaborative calls. We engaged in virtual one-to-one and small group coaching to help them through both the planning, but also the collection of data and the interpretation of the data. At the start of the Learning Collaborative, we put together this key drivers diagram. So this really helped us formulate what are our aims and how are we going to get there. So you can see on the left-hand side, this is our overarching Learning Collaborative aim, which was to increase fathers' involvement in home visiting and parenting. And we saw 2 primary drivers, 2 main ways we can get to that aim. One is to increase fathers' involvement in home visiting directly. So is he participating in sessions? Is he participating in group connections? But we also wanted to increase father involvement in parenting. So how often is the father participating in activities in the child's life and the family's daily functioning? And we also wanted to increase family knowledge about the important role fathers play in the lives of their child. As we move from left to right, you can see we get more refined in how we're going about these aims. And so on the far right-hand side, you see some change idea examples. And the ones in bold and larger text are some of the ones that were most frequently adopted by our LIAs. So that some of them use direct communication with fathers. They sent text messages, they sent reminders to try and engage fathers in visits. They also sent welcome letters and other materials encouraging fathers to participate in the home visits and group connections. And then to increase fathers' involvement in parenting, they gave activities to do with the child, even if these were done outside of the home visit. They encouraged fathers to read to their children. They also distributed welcome letters and materials, but these were more geared towards the importance of the father and the role that he plays. And then we also worked on increasing provider and family knowledge about the role of the father. From September 2019 to July 2021, our programs completed 33 separate PDSA cycles. These were done by 11 local programs that were housed within 9 local implementing agencies. Of those 9 local implementing agencies, all of them administered one of 2 evidence-based home visiting models, either parents as teachers or safe care. In our Learning Collaborative, we do also have nurse-family partnership programs. However, during this period of time explicitly, they were pulled out due to COVID-19 responsibilities. So they were doing things like contact tracing and administering vaccines. Therefore, they didn't participate in this round of our Learning Collaborative, but they are back and engaged in our most current one. Here's an example of some of the materials that our LIAs put together. This is a welcome letter and fact sheet that was distributed trying to engage families around reading time. So why should fathers read to their child? What are the benefits to the family? What are the benefits to the child? And trying to educate families about that benefit. This is just one quick finding from a PDSA. So this was focused on the involvement in home visiting. And in this program, they tried to get fathers to attend group connections. What we see here is that at the end of their PDSA period, about 44% of all families had a father figure who attended at least one group connection. This was a pretty significant improvement. Prior to this, this program was closer to 10% of fathers were participating. And so they jumped up considerably in terms of attendance to group connections. And they did that by distributing those welcome letters that I just showed. Other programs focused on the involvement in parenting. Here's one example. So this was focused on reading frequency. And what you can see to the left is that before engaging in this PDSA, families reported that on average, fathers were reading about 2.5 times a week to their child. And this program, their goal was to increase by 10%. You can see that red dashed line. That's what they were trying to get to. But on the right-hand side, you can see where they finished up, which is a 108.3% increase in father frequency of reading. So by the end of their PDSA, families were reporting that fathers were reading 5 times a week to their children. We also collected data across the entire learning collaborative. And that was explicitly directed at involvement in parenting. So we asked across all of our LIAs for them to talk to their families about how often fathers were engaging in these behaviors. So the measure was, when available, how often does the father figure spend time with the child, change diapers or help with bathroom routines, help with mealtime, use your desired discipline practices to manage misbehavior, provide comfort to the child when the child is upset, hurt, or sick, care for the child by himself without your help or supervision, and help the child learn new things. Parents could respond that the father never did these things, rarely, sometimes, often, or always. And we looked at these at the item level, and we also combined them to get a mean score across all items as a general measure of parenting involvement. Our SMART aim across the entire learning collaborative was that average father involvement across the local implementing agencies will increase significantly for home visiting families with an identified father figure by July 2021. Here's what we saw across those different parenting practices. Easiest way to read this figure is to look at the shades of color. So when you see purple, that's a family indicating that the father never did these things. And when you see that more salmon color, that's indicating that fathers always did these things. And there are a couple of takeaways from this. One is there's a high level of variability. We see families where they're indicating fathers are never doing certain practices, and others where they're saying fathers are doing these quite a lot, if not always. And we're also seeing that the responses differ depending on the specific question. So there's a little bit more variability when we ask about father figures using mom's desired discipline practice compared to others where it's a more frequent response of always. So when you look at father figure provides comfort to the child, more families are indicating that fathers always do these things, although it's still not always across all the families. So room for improvement for each of these behaviors. We also looked across the agencies to see, are we seeing improvement in parenting involvement over time? These figures are for our PAT programs, and each program is listed on the left-hand column, and we're seeing 2-month change scores and 4-month change scores. And at the bottom, you can see where we aggregated across all PAT programs. The takeaway here is when we first look at 2 months, we're not seeing a change. There's essentially no improvement over a 2-month period. But by the time we get to 4 months, we are seeing a change in positive parenting such that fathers are more engaged in parenting at 4 months relative to their baseline level. We looked at the same thing for our safe care programs, and you can see we have fewer safe care programs relative to PAT. So we had a smaller sample size here, which perhaps explains why we didn't see significant findings, even though the trends were in the expected direction. So at both 2 months and at 4 months, we're seeing an increase in parenting involvement for fathers over time. We found a couple innovations worth repeating that I want to highlight. One, fact sheets and handouts help inform fathers on the importance of daily routines and increase father involvement both in home visiting and in parenting. The welcome letters that were mailed directly to father figures were well received. Fathers really emphasized that it made them feel included when the letters were sent to them, not sent to the mother, indirectly involving them. After working with PAT activities, some fathers established learning activities and reading routines with their children, and fathers were receptive to participating in group connections, again, especially when they're directly invited and they feel that they are being included. Some lessons learned and room for improvement. Despite our best efforts, father figure availability may be out of our control at times due to schedules. However, we can encourage father figures to do things like read to their child regardless of location. So what we ran into is that, first of all, about 40 to 50% of our families did not have an identified father figure. Even with that broader definition, there's still a fair amount of families where they did not have somebody that fit that role. And for others who did have a father figure, there were scheduling difficulties. So they may be unable to attend visits because of work schedules. And some of them even were unable to be directly involved in parenting because they were residing out of state for work or things like that. But if you get creative and you think of ways to still engage, like online books, reading apps, there were ways that we could still get father figures engaged in the lives of their child, regardless of location. Mothers reported relatively high levels of father involvement in parenting routines. At times we saw what was close to a ceiling effect. We actually adapted our measure of parenting involvement over time to address the ceiling effect. Regardless of the parenting, though, we saw less direct engagement in home visiting. So fathers were still infrequently and inconsistently engaging in direct visits, although we saw improvement over time in that. One reason we saw improvement over time was by offering more visits and group connections in the evenings and on weekends, again, trying to work around scheduling conflicts. How does this work mirror precision research, and how is it different? Many of you are probably familiar with this figure, the precision paradigm. And as Anne just reviewed in her opening speech, there are these key ingredients: intervention coherence, study efficiency, and diverse perspectives, these major domains that the precision paradigm is focusing on. And I'm just going to briefly walk through how our work is like that and how it differs. So a focus on ingredients. Yes, we focused on ingredients. Each of our LIAs tested their own change idea. Some used welcome letters, others focused on content within the home visit. So we could see what worked best at engaging fathers in parenting and home visiting. But because each LIA got to choose their own change idea, we didn't specify change in a standardized way for cross-learning. So we didn't have a comprehensive, let's test this, then test this across all of our LIAs. I would say to some exception, we did have a fair amount of programs that focused on reading and getting fathers involved in reading. And that helped us learn a little bit more about which strategies worked to get fathers engaged in reading and which were not as successful. But that's a direction for future research for sure. In terms of intervention coherence, our change ideas aligned with home visiting experience. We really drew from the expertise of our home visiting providers, but we didn't explicitly align with theory or empirical evidence. I would say many of the change ideas tested probably were grounded in theory and empirical evidence to some extent, but we didn't explicitly tie behavioral theories of change, for example, to our change ideas that we were implementing. For study coherence, we measured target behaviors. So trying to get fathers more engaged in parenting, try to get them more involved in home visiting. And we predicted that if we could do these things, we'd actually see improvement for the child. So part of our external evaluation that I won't have time to discuss today was actually measuring if we engage fathers in these target behaviors, if we get them to engage in home visiting, if we get them to engage in parenting, are we seeing improvements for the child? And our early work in our external evaluation suggests, yes, we do see improvements and we see gains for the child. I would say we had less emphasis on mechanisms of action or context in this current CQI work, although we're thinking about how to incorporate that more in the future. Study efficiency, we used rapid cycle methods. We focused on a PDSA design, which, as Anne alluded to, not at the high end of the continuum in terms of rigor. It's not a most or smart design, but we did use these rapid cycle methods. And in terms of diverse perspectives, we incorporated the views of local program staff pretty heavily. They helped us design everything. It was really driven by them. They got to make these decisions. We didn't incorporate the views of the family at the planning stage, although we did talk to them about their feelings during and after. But this is, again, something that we're talking about incorporating more as we move forward, is how to get the families involved, even in the planning stage, even in thinking about what we want to do going forward. So all of this work is really to address that question that Anne presented of what works best for whom, in which context, and why. And I think this is a good example of a starting point, and then other ways to incorporate the precision paradigm more in the future. I just want to end really quickly with kind of some hot off the press pilot data. What we started thinking about is we have mean engagement at baseline that's highlighted here. This is fathers' involvement in parenting. And we wanted to see if their baseline behavior predicted their behavior at 2 months. And we see that it significantly did. But what we also see is there is a wealth of data being collected by these home visitors that we're currently not utilizing. In the information that I presented earlier, we didn't account for a lot of these other family dynamics and characteristics. But as we start to think more about potential mediators and moderators of these effects, again, getting closer to that precision paradigm, there's a wealth of data that we could start taking advantage of that's already being collected in these home visits. Here's an example. So when you look at 4 months, that mean engagement at baseline is no longer significant, and the employment status of the parent is. So starting to think about some family characteristics that might play into, again, what works best for whom and in which context, why, and how. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions. I know I can only maybe take 1 or 2 right now, and then later if people have more questions. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Helen. Great presentation. And thank you for keeping it to the 20 minutes as well. That will allow us to take those 1 or 2 burning questions. So folks, feel free to put the questions in the chat, or unmute yourself and ask the question. Okay, if folks want to think a little more, please, put your questions together, and we will, as I said, have about 20 minutes at the end to ask Helen and Christine questions. So with that, we will transition to our second presentation by Christine Callahan.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, everybody. Great to see everybody here. I do want to say I share my time, as Darius said, between the University at Albany, the Center for Human Services Research, and then also the University of Maryland School of Social Work and its Financial Social Work Initiative. I want to give a huge shout out to my colleagues at the both at CHSR and with the New York State Office of Children and Family Services, because they have been just very, very supportive of this work of integrating planning, programming, and really integrating and evaluating the introduction of financial literacy and financial capability programming into home visiting in New York State, in Healthy Families New York. And so just a huge shout out for them. So home visiting often aims to promote family economic self-sufficiency, and this is a major part, in addition to other outcomes and other huge components of healthy of home visiting programming and so forth. But I want to talk today about integrating financial capability and financial literacy programming into home visiting as a pathway to increasing family economic self-sufficiency and overall family well-being in this way. Financial capability is a complex pathway with many facets, which we're going to be talking about a lot during the next 20 minutes here. And I do just want to say as well that there is just a longstanding appreciation of this pathway within social work practice, and a growing appreciation of it within home visiting practice. In my work at the University of Maryland School of Social Work, and really before that, I was a clinician for many years, focusing on financial distress in a medical setting. And for the past 10 years that I've been with the University of Maryland, we've been doing a lot of research and training around not only financial social work, but also financial literacy and financial capability in a range of nonprofit and social service settings. That includes child welfare, Head Start, medical practice, reentry, school social work, intimate partner violence, really a whole host of settings where we are training social workers and other helping professionals in financial social work and financial capability work on behalf of in the settings where they are practicing, but then also within home visiting now, and really trying to build and integrate this programming as a way to build family financial stability and financial capability with families in healthy families. So when we talk about financial capability, it's really kind of a broad term. It encompasses financial literacy, which is basically kind of the financial knowledge, the nuts and bolts of our personal financial decision making and our money and things like that. What do we know about making decisions about with our money and things like that. So it's kind of the nuts and bolts of that. But then another important part of that is access to financial services. So it's not only these really important resources such as WIC and SNAP and TANF and SSI and other programs, but it's also access to other services that can help facilitate financial actions. And these are things such as free financial coaching, access to other services, that can help with our day-to-day personal financial decision making. These are things like getting free help with taxes through an IRS certified VITA program, things like that. If we're having problems with banking or getting banked, its connection with banking, with banks and sound reputable institutions, products and services that can help facilitate our day-to-day financial decision making. And then leading really ideally to financial empowerment, so that we feel more confident and capable in managing our money, and then using products and services that we have available to us that work best for ourselves and our families. And empowerment also goes hand in hand with self-efficacy, like financial self-efficacy. Do we feel confident and capable in making these decisions? Do we feel that we've got the resources and the access, to do so, and things like that. So when we're talking about financial capability, within a range of settings, social service and nonprofit and human service settings, including home visiting, these are just very important things to consider as a part of the cadre of services and things like that, not only for our families, our clients, but then also how we feel that way about ourselves and our confidence in practice, in reaching out to people around their financial stressors and needs and distress and so forth. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that in just a couple of minutes. So this project within Healthy Families New York has the primary objective is to improve family financial capability and thus improving family economic well-being. And some of the preliminary objectives that we had when we started out was to really understand the financial stressors that parents and families experience and how these contribute to financial distress. We also focused on designing programming to build on current practice in order to address these financial stressors through direct service and referrals, and then also to assess implementation and impacts of the financial capability programming within healthy families. So we started this out in 2 phases. I've been on board at the University at Albany since June of 2019. Phase 1 was really the preliminary work because this was brand new to Healthy Families New York. When I first started, I spent a lot of time not only conceptualizing the project and how this might look within healthy families and within home visiting, but after we did that, we also, really explained the project and what the background and what was behind it to programs across the state in a variety of venues. And then really sought to engage programs on a voluntary basis. This wasn't mandatory, but we sought to engage programs across New York State to participate in this pilot project on financial literacy and financial capability. Part of this involved assessing the current situation with families, with healthy families. I'll talk a little bit more about this in greater detail in the coming slides, but we sought to gain families and visitors' perspective on current financial stressors. We also wanted to understand home visitors' preferences regarding training and programming and their personal experience regarding economic well-being. And with that, not only families' economic well-being, but also their own economic well-being, because a lot of times in training and with this work, and we have found this, especially so with social workers and other helping professionals, that as you're learning about how to address financial distress and how to increase financial capability with your clients and families and communities, we also want to learn these things for ourselves. If we are struggling with different financial stressors, or if we are desiring information on our own financial well-being, these two often go hand in hand. And so as we're learning about ourselves, then we can also learn about our families and learn more about the financial stressors that they might be dealing with. So this was a part of phase 1, really kind of getting the lay of the land, beginning to engage programs across the state. This took place between 2019 and 2021. And then the phase 2, which is designing and testing the intervention, which is what is going on right now, and then will continue through next year. So for phase 1, the preliminary work, the methods, what I did was to conduct a Qualtrics survey of families and had a survey that could be that was anonymous for families, and kind of site by site for the sites that and the programs that wanted to participate in this pilot project. Just a survey that took about, really less than 10 minutes to complete, and just asked different questions about different financial topics and financial stressors, and whether or not people had an interest in learning more, or if they needed help with, or if they wanted both. And I'll talk about that survey in just a couple of minutes. We also did a very similar survey with program staff, where we were asking similar questions and getting their perspectives and their perceptions of what families were dealing with. What they felt that families might be struggling with, and then also asked several questions about their personal interest in learning more about financial security and financial stability, and then their preferred training methods as well. So here's just a snapshot of what we had found, and you can see here that they diverge a little bit. So this was across 3 programs So a staff, 31 staff members answered the Qualtrics survey, and then 33 families answered the survey. And these are questions, such as, getting and using a bank account, especially relevant if people are what we call unbanked or underbanked, or if they've had banking problems in the past that they're trying to get a handle on. Getting free financial coaching, talking with my partner about finances, increasing income, and you can see the rest of the topics here. So the staff are marked in red, families in blue, and you can see that staff, there just is a little bit of a divergence here, where families were reporting different things or different interests in some of these financial topics. In terms of staff views on learning more about financial security, we asked a question, you can see here, about what were the preferred delivery methods for brief training around these financial security resources. And I do want to say here, the Qualtrics survey is the first step in finding out more about the financial stressors. The next step is to provide trainings around those topics. And I'll get to that in a moment as well. But when we ask staff about, what are the preferred modes of training, you can see here about 40% said interactive online training, 35% said an information sheet, 29% said a resource guide, 35% said a website with drop downs for resources. And then finally, 55%, so a pretty significant majority, were saying, in-person training is what they wanted. 86% said they were interested in talking further about family financial security. And 82% said that they would like to learn more about family financial security for myself. So phase two, and that is what is happening right now. The intervention design is through services to promote family financial capability. It's services such as home visitor discussion of financial needs with families during visits. So these are trainings that I designed and am doing right now. And I'll talk about that in a moment as well. But really talking with home visitors about how do you understand the financial stressors that a family might be dealing with, and it goes way beyond just income into a household. As we saw from the slide just a moment ago, families are dealing with with other financial stressors or with needs. It might be things having to do with credit or debt or banking or taxes or getting free financial coaching for self-identified financial goals, things like that. Also talking with home visitors about referrals to local resources that support family financial capability. And then doing group trainings, both for families and for visitors. And again, these are revolving around the topics that have been identified in the Qualtrics surveys. And then also providing a lot of staff support to implement the intervention. And here I want to say too, part of what I'm doing is crafting site-specific resource guides, family or financial resource guides that are tailored to each site that has been involved with this project. There is a lot of variation throughout New York State on resources that are available for families. But part of what I want to do and what I have been doing is identifying those resources that are within a particular program's geographical area to understand what's out there. And a lot of these things home visitors already know. These are things like food banks, shelters, utility assistance, rent assistance and things like that, but really pertaining more to financial literacy and financial capability. It's also, connecting with local nonprofits or other agencies that are offering financial coaching, free financial coaching, financial education, other one-on-one coaching, things like that for self-identified financial goals. And these are really growing throughout the nation. Some examples here are like financial empowerment centers that offer free financial coaching for people, for any resident within that area. There are a lot of them within New York State. There's a organization that's called the Cities for Financial Empowerment, and this organization funds financial empowerment centers in cities throughout the nation. And so if there is a financial empowerment center that's near a program site, I want to make sure that they know about that service and that they connect with them. And so that's really important. Other things that I include in my financial resource guides are things, help with taxes, immigration, legal, mental health, behavioral health, and things like that. But I call them financial resource guides. Also, as a part of the intervention, the phase 2. I want to just take a moment to say that I'm working currently with 2 programs on this particular phase of the pilot testing project here. So working with 2 programs, one's upstate here in New York State, one's downstate. Approximately 20 home visitors are involved with this, along with 80 families. It is voluntary, so it's not mandated. The design approach is longitudinal, and it's a mixed methods study. So some of the research questions with respect to implementation, to what extent do visitors and families take part in trainings? How do they rate these trainings? My process research questions, how do visitors communicate with families to promote financial capability, to understand financial distress that families might be dealing with, and then how to promote financial capability working together, what referrals are they making, and so forth. And then the outcome research question, the bottom line, does this programming improve family economic well-being? And a couple of ways that we're doing this. I start off with the Qualtrics survey. I do trainings. Typically, these have been 5 monthly trainings dealing with a particular topic that families and visitors have identified, and crafting the financial resource guides as well, talking with visitors about how they are asking about income, financial distress within the household, and so forth. And so, baseline, post-training, have a survey that examines the satisfaction with the training, and then also looking at family financial stress, and financial well-being at 6 months, and then also at 12 months. Let me just go to these measures here that we're using. For family financial well-being, baseline 6 months, 12 months, we're using a scale that's called the Family Financial Well-being Scale, and this is from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is a small government agency that's under the Department of Treasury. This scale is widely used within social work, research, and clinical practice as well, to get a better understanding of where families are in terms of their overall financial well-being. So it can be used in practice, it is used in practice, but it's also used in research in order to be able to gauge change over time. And then for home visitors, we're also using something that we've crafted and are using at the University of Maryland School of Social Work. that's called the Financial Capability Skills Practice Scale. And this is just trying to understand visitors' comfort with broaching financial conversations, how they're gathering information about income, benefits, and other things that the families might be dealing with financially. So their comfort level, how comfortable are they with making referrals, and things like that. So this is a scale that's, that's important to also to understand, just looking at skills and their practice, and so forth. So I wanted to just, just kind of close with, how this project might advance precision home visiting for families, and really looking at that outcome on family financial well-being and economic stability. Can integrating this programming and helping home visitors feel more comfortable with this content, not only for themselves, but then also for their families. What sort of an impact is this having just on this outcome, and seeing if they're seeing the potential impact of this programming on family financial well-being. And then also, looking at how this work and the precision paradigm, how does this support staff and home visitors' sense of comfort to address issues of family economic capability, as a mediator of actual practice, and do they feel more comfortable not only with kind of thinking about their own financial well-being, but then also just really addressing it with their families as well. And again, just an important caveat, and I might be talking about this in a little bit in the Q&A period. There are just a wealth of resources, financial coaching, and nonprofit, reputable, sound financial coaching resources that are available to to people, to our clients, to our families, that can help people find greater financial stability, work on goals that they have been really concerned about, maybe they feel overwhelmed by. But there is help out there. And one of the bottom line takeaways from this project is just making sure that our visitors and our families connect with these resources, and not only to improve family financial well-being, but so that they understand that there is help out there, that it's not necessary to be overwhelmed and feel hopeless, feel lost because of because of financial distress. But kind of implementing this programming is a way to really strengthen economic well-being for families, and that's really my goal with this project. So I would look forward to answering your questions as well, and just talking with you about this, what we feel is kind of an innovative way to look at these important issues within home visiting.
Thanks
finally,
so much,
just some,
Christine.
yeah, sure, absolutely.
Did you want to give your closing comments? I just want to make sure that we leave time for questions.
Absolutely, sure. This is just something that I tell programs, just, these are the benefits of this programming for participating, learning about those local resources that provide financial coaching, other types of specialized assistance, and building family financial stability, which I think is so important and really goes hand in hand with overall family well-being and stability.
Great. Thank you, Christine.
Sure. Thank you.
Why don't, for the sake of time, why don't we open it up to both presenters at this time? We are going to go until 1:35 Central, 2:35 Eastern, so about 13 minutes for questions. So please feel free to put questions in the chat, or just unmute yourself and ask our presenters a direct question.
I have a question for Christine. What do you make of you presented that the survey results earlier in your presentation, and it looked like the home visiting staff said that there was a lot more reported interest in these topics among the home visiting staff than among the families. And what do you make of that?
I think, yeah, I know that was really interesting and kind of a surprising finding. I think maybe their perceptions of the families are just so much different from what families are actually experiencing. And when I also looked at some of the findings, that families had a lot more interest, say, like in talking with my partner about finances, or getting free financial coaching for myself, than what the visitors perceived that they would be. So I think maybe just a bit of a disconnect, which is why it's really important for visitors to have this dialogue and discussions with families about some of the. So it's not only about income, these very basic questions that are also very important, but just doing a deeper dive into some of these issues that families might be struggling with that they aren't being very vocal about. So that, I think that was one of my takeaways.
Other questions again?
Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Sure.
Other questions? Again, feel free to unmute yourself and speak up.
So I have a question to Helen. Thank you for the talk. It's so nice to know. So you mentioned that a portion of the father were not present in the family. And the COIN project emphasized comprehensive relationship education. I put in the chat, measured the increase of those services from 41% to 58%. However, relationship education was not comprehensive or standardized across models. So from your understanding of your data, were those quality of the relationship among intimate partners, were those measured? How important we may consider those when you're looking at parental involvement in the outcome?
Yes, absolutely. For the purpose of our CQI work, we did not measure the relationship quality between mom and the father figure. However, for our external evaluation work, we did. So what we did for our external evaluation work, which was a little bit separate, is that we had a sub-sample of about 100 families that were participating in these home visiting programs. And we did a deeper dive with them where we did a more comprehensive assessment of their family functioning, including marital or relationship quality satisfaction, co-parenting relationship satisfaction. And so we looked at those in relation to these family outcomes, and we could see that those were important moderators of some of these effects, starting to think about how the family coexisted and co-parented. So we do have that measurement. And for the external evaluation, it was an important predictor. And we included those in the models when we were looking at how father involvement in parenting, father involvement in home visiting related to some of these child outcomes. But in a lot of our models, even when you take into consideration the specific family dynamics, when fathers are more engaged in parenting, it's still predicted over and above some of these other family dynamics. So it seemed to be pretty crucial for several child outcomes, regardless of what the family chemistry looked like. Just having father involved was still really important.
Thank you. Hopefully
Absolutely.
you can publish this more sample and to think about the comments you provide today, because looking at the safe, stable, nurturing relationship, how important in the home visiting program, we don't have comprehensive measures. You have 100 participants. That's important. Think about reducing maternal morbidity and mortality, those safety issues. The stable relationship and the nurturing relationship among couples are maybe more important, driving the quality of the paternal involvement.
Thank you. Yes. And we are currently working on some publications off of that data. In addition to the 100 families in home visiting, we also have a comparison sample of 100 families who are not participating in home visiting, but they're demographically similar. These were moms recruited from a WIC sample. And so we're looking to see how father involvement differs from families in home visiting and those not in home visiting, and seeing some really interesting findings. So,
thank you. That's
more
great.
to come
work.
on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, great question and great line of future inquiry for sure. Pivoting back to Christine, there's a question in the chat. Will the Healthy Family New York study be looking at how families provide financial education and community resource information to home visitors? It's been my experience that many home visitors learn a lot about resources from the families they serve.
That's a great point. That's something that we haven't built in, but certainly is an intriguing idea to look at. And I know families often are the experts in what's available within communities and what is helpful for them, and then sharing that with home visitors who often are are having difficulties themselves. So that's a great point to include for our work and for next steps and so forth. Thank you.
And if I could just build on that for a second, thinking about Helen's presentation, you mentioned that you did involve service providers, but not parents in developing some of the ideas. And there was also a comment that you made about how not all of the change ideas were necessarily linked to behavior change theory. And I'm wondering, moving forward for your own work or for others who are interested in doing similar CQI work, what advice would you give around how to develop those change ideas, knowing that it is important to incorporate parent perspectives, provider perspectives, but also be theoretically grounded?
In terms of incorporating parent voice, we have a parent partnership board that has been part of our university for the past 10 years. It's made up of parents that have participated in Safe Care previously. And they've mostly been focused on advocating around safe care and getting parent voice into some of these prevention programs. We have been talking more recently about how to build out that group and incorporate them more into our CQI work and into we're part of the coordinated state evaluation that's going on right now for MCV. So we're hoping to open it up to families across all of the models that we serve in Oklahoma, and to start incorporating them at the planning stages. So thinking about including them when we have our learning sessions, when we have our times where we're putting together the PDSA plans, getting their voice and starting to think through the change theories, because some things work better for families than others, and getting their perspective on what is it that they see as needed change, what do they see as ways of creating that change. They have some really great insights, and we haven't incorporated that enough. So that's what we want to do going forward. And in terms of behavioral change theories, I know that HARC's been doing a lot of work around that. And so I think we'll be taking some of their best practices and lessons learned from all the work they're incorporating and trying to build that into our work as well.
Thanks, Helen. Should have time for a couple more questions. I mean, I will take moderator's prerogative and keep asking questions, but I want to open it up to the audience. So sticking with you for, oh, okay, there's a question in the chat. Question is, I'm curious how including parents in the development of the key driver diagram, the theory itself, might be a strong method for integrating theory, context, and lived experience from the beginning.
That is a really great point. We have started to do this a little bit more for our coordinated state evaluation. We went to our Safe Care Parent Partnership Board and talked to them about our research aims, the questions we're planning to ask, and got their feedback on them, and also start to think through, what are we missing? What haven't we thought about? What are some of the constraints to these questions, and who should we have at the table when we start to think about our methods? For example, we're really interested in learning why families who are eligible for home visiting choose not to participate. That's one of our main research aims going forward. And they had some really great insights into the reasons why they were resistant to initially enroll in home visiting and why some of their friends and families, even after learning about the benefits of Safe Care, for example, still choose not to participate. So I think that they have a different perspective than researchers have, and they have a different perspective even than the home visitors. And when we don't include those voices, we miss some things. And David is writing into the chat. David's one of my collaborators on this work, that we've attempted this once before for a learning collaborative on family engagement. And we'll be revisiting this work for our upcoming CSE work. So it's definitely something that we are moving towards. And we've received some really great feedback and encouragement from HRSA about strategies to do this. So we'll be trying to incorporate some of that as well.
Thanks, Ellen. Thank you also, David, for chiming in. We have about a minute left, and I think, rather than truncate the response, I will just sort of close by thanking both of the presenters and really acknowledging what Anne said earlier, that having first-time presenters to the HARC meeting is really fabulous, and to see the diversity in presentations just within this breakout and other breakouts is really great to see, and also how folks are thinking about how their work can connect to the precision paradigm. So really appreciate both of you taking the energy to think about that connection between your work and the precision paradigm, because that is certainly something that all of us are thinking about. And I don't think we have all of the answers yet. So this is really excellent food for thought in terms of how you conceptualize your work and how you're seeing some of the future directions fit with the precision paradigm. So thank you both for the presentations, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And